Good day. I'm Vincent Saxtetter, and this is my channel, After the Age of Fire. Today is episode 5. The title is There is No Population Bomb. Um, you know, the reason why I bring this up is I've talked in the last episode about how our resource consumption has been doubling. Just about every resource has been doubling roughly every 22 years, some a little faster, some slower. And energy use over the last 200 years, the average was 21 years, for it multiplying by 2 every 21 years. And then more recently, between 1934 and 2014, so over 80 years, our energy use was multiplying by 2 every 24 years. Um, and when people talk about the impact that we're having on the environment and of a variety of other problems that the human race has, it's often there's a feeling in the air that this is all because there's more people, so we're sharing the energy and the resources between more people, and this is just wrong. Um, the reason why our energy use and our resource use has been going up is not because of population growth. Well, there's a little bit of that. It's because of other things. So I just want to set that out and talk about the reality of what's been going on, what's really been growing, and how fast our population has been growing compared to our resource use. Um, and there's a very important consequence of this, the fact that the real problem is not population growth. Um, the consequence is that we really have to, if we want to think about whether we're likely to run out of resources, or whether we're using too many resources already, or whatever, um, we shouldn't spend a lot of time at first thinking about population. Population is something that we have some control over, um, over whether we have more children or not, and how many more children. We have some control over it, though it seems like lately uh, we're kind of in a nosedive and don't seem to be able to pull out of it in most countries. Um, so I'm not sure even there how much we're able to control our population growth, um, but um, but there are many things you can do about resource consumption, and they're all things that we could do. But like I said in a previous episode, first we should pay attention to the world around us, and if we pay careful attention to that, we'll understand it better. Then maybe our reactions and things we could do could fall into place, and also maybe we'll learn what we can solve and what we can't solve. There are some things that no matter what we do, we can't solve, and it would be nice to know which ones those are instead of reiterating a long list or a short list. Say we'll solve everything with birth control, um, and will that solve anything? Um, so let's get started. Um, so I want to talk a little bit. I'll give several reasons why population growth is not really the source of our resource consumption growth or our energy growth, and why it's not really the problem. The first is that between 1815 and 2014, our energy use multiplied by 800. It was doubling every 21 years or so. You do enough doublings and you come to a factor of 800, so we're using 800, the human race is using 800 times more stuff in 2014, more energy and probably more of all resources in 2014 than in 1815. But during that same 200 years, our population multiplied by less than 8. We just haven't been growing our population that fast compared to what we're using. In fact, it's if you wanted to find a multiplier, find out when our population was 1/8 of its population in 2014, you'd be looking before 1800, um, around the time that the human race's exponential growth started. Um, so another way of saying this is that our energy use was multiplying by 2 every 21 years, so our population was multiplying by 2 every 73 years. So our population growth, the amount of energy that we were using, that our children, after one generation, our children would be using roughly twice as much energy and twice as much of other resources. Again, this is averaging over the entire human race. It's not a fair average because most of the human race still is not using as much as the rich countries do, not nearly. But just averaging across the whole human race, the average child had twice as much as his parents. But it wasn't like the parents were having, or almost twice as much, but it isn't like there were twice as many children in each generation. It took about 3 generations for there to be twice as many children. So another way of saying this is that the average person worldwide uses around 100 times more of everything now than they did in 1815. So sure, we have around 8 times as many people, a little less than 8 times, but each of those people is using 100 times more stuff. Okay, so I don't think that, if we were all using the same amount of stuff that we did in 1815, we would not be talking at all about a problem with environment or with anything else about the world around us. Okay, we'd be talking about our health or how to keep ourselves alive, whatever. Um, but certainly wouldn't be talking about extinction of rhinos and so on. The reason why the rhinos are being extinguished and other species is being threatened is not because of the number of people. It's because how we're dominating the land. So that's the first reason. Population growth just does not nearly keep up with our resource growth. Um, uh, um, the second reason is that if we ever were doing exponential growth, and actually we weren't, and I'll come to that in the next point, but certainly we're not doing it now. From 1980 to 2020, we're absolutely not doing exponential growth. If we were doing exponential growth of our population, then every year the addition to our population would be a little bigger than the previous year. So in around 1980, we were adding about 80 million to our population each year, and if we were doing exponential growth, the amount of people that we would be adding to our population each year now would be a lot more than 80 million. It would be closer to 200 million, maybe 210 million, if we had continued the same exponential growth that we were doing back then. So instead, the amount of people that we add each year is, for the last 40 years, has been 80 million people. That's a growth in our total population of about 80 million people until when COVID hit, and I'm not sure what happened after COVID hit. But probably since then, the number of people added per year has actually decreased. At any rate, the number of people added per year was going to decrease sooner or later, because this number of people added per year is not really because of extra births. It's partly some extra births, but it's mostly because people are getting older. So people are being born, and the old people aren't dying yet. The people who were born in 1970 and 1980 aren't dying yet. So when those people start dying, it's sure that the number of people added each year will decrease, because the number of people dying each year will increase once that old generation finally starts dying. The number of people dying each year will increase. The number of people being born each year is not increasing, and in fact it's probably decreasing. And so the total number of people added each year will decrease. It's just simple subtraction. You take the number of people being born, you subtract the number of people dying, and if one stays the same, another one increases, the number of people dying increases, then you subtract the two, and you find that the total number of new people on this planet is smaller each year. So it wasn't going to stay 80 million; it was going to decrease. Okay, sooner or later. Um, in fact, the peak growth of the human race was in 1968. Um, at that time, if we had kept on going that way, then you could have expected one doubling every 33 years. But in fact, it's much different now. Um, we're just not doubling. Exponential growth means, among other things, it means that your population would be multiplying by 2 every whatever years, and but also it means that the number of people added each year would be multiplying at the same rate. Um, and then the third point is that our population growth never was exponential. Exponential growth, as I just said, means multiplying by the same amount on a schedule, on a timer. So it could be, every hour you multiply by 2, or it could be every year you multiply by 2, or every 30 years you multiply by 2, but it should be every year each time. So 30 years multiplied by 2, 30 more years multiplied by 2 again, so now you're a factor of 4 bigger. Another 30 years you multiply by 2 again, then you're 8 times bigger. Okay, that would be exponential growth. And sure, there are exceptions. You can't expect perfect exponential growth from the human race or from anything biological, basically, but you can get near to it, say in bacteria in a petri dish, but you aren't going to get it from the human race, so fine. But what we've been doing is very, very far from any sort of exponential growth. And it always has been. I mean, as far as we can trace back our population, it gets very difficult to be sure what our population was 2,000 years ago or 1,500 years ago. But our best estimates are that 1,500 years ago, our population was 250 million people, 250 million people. Okay, now we can look at how long. I'm sorry, not 1,500 years ago. That was 2,000 years ago. The time of Jesus, 2,000 years ago, our population was around 250 million people worldwide, apparently, and then it took 1,500 years for our population to multiply by 2. So from 0 AD to 1,500 AD, our population grew from 250 million to 500 million. Now there were ups and downs, I'm sure. And all of that's pretty complex, but I'm just reporting the best estimates that I could find from the scientific literature. Then so that's 1,500 years for a doubling. The next doubling took only 300 years. That was from 500 million, a half billion, to 1 billion. It took 300 years, 304 years and it went from the year 1500 to the year 1804. Okay, so 1,500-year doubling, a 300-year doubling. And then the next doubling took 120 years. That was from 1804 to 1927. That was 1 billion to 2 billion. So in 1927, the world had 2 billion people living on it. Okay, then the next doubling took 47 years. That's going from 2 billion to 4 billion, going from 1927 to 1974. Okay, 47 years. Okay. So the doublings were getting faster. 1,500 years, 300 years, 120 years, 47 years. You might have expected the next doubling would be in 15 years or 20 years, who knows. But instead, the next doubling going from 4 billion to 8 billion took 49 years, about the same as the previous doubling from 1974 to 2023. We just finished that. We just crossed 8 billion people a couple years ago. So overall, that's 1500 years, 300 years, 120 years, 47 years, 49 years. There's no way you could call that exponential growth. It's something else. Absolutely something else. Sure, there's multiplications, sure, but it's not exponential growth. And because it's not exponential growth, you can't make any predictions about the future. You have to fit it to some other curve. Um, you have to find it's not the right pattern. You have to find out what the right pattern is, and it's anybody's guess. Okay, so all the talk about how our population was exploding was based on a completely wrong pattern. Always was. Um, but in fact, if you talk about a doubling from 1974 to 2023, that papers over the fact that from 1980 onward we haven't been. Uh, in fact, our peak, I said there was a 47-year doubling from 1927 to 1974, another 49-year doubling from 1974 to 2023. That covers up, I mean, just obscures a little bit the fact that our peak was in the middle of those two doublings. Our peak was 33. It would have been a 33-year doubling time, and it would have been in 1968. And since then, it's been going down. And by 1980, we just weren't doubling. Okay, and the way our population is growing, the way that people are getting older, it's sure that we're not going to even. I mean, the number of people added per year is going to decrease, and there's a very good chance that sometime in the next 50 years, um, actually our total world population will decrease. Um, so we completely stepped off I mean, we were doing doublings just not on not on a schedule, and not the exponential schedule, uh, the metronome. But now we're not even doing doublings, and it looks like we're going to start decreasing sometime soon if things continue going as they seem to be. Just in a very brief summary, I'll get into this in later episodes. It's one of the most important facts of current history. Most of the world's countries are below replacement rate. That means the number of children that an average family has is smaller than the number of children that they would need to have the same number of people in the next generation as in the previous generation. So that means in most countries they're setting things up that pretty sooner or later the total population of that country will decrease. And in some places the decreases are just, I mean, some places they're having like half a child per family. You would need 2.1 children per family, and half a child per family means after a few generations that country just won't exist anymore. There's only a few countries, only a few areas, very few areas that are continuing to be significantly above replacement rate. That means ones that are set to increase their population. One is Africa south of the Sahara. Another one is the stands over in Western Asia, like Kazakhstan, Pakistan, Uzbekistan. There's like 7 of them. And another one is certain Middle East countries, so like Israel. I think also Yemen, and a few more. Those are the places that still have some serious population growth going on. There are places where if you count the population, even though they're not reproducing enough, the population still continues to go up a bit. That would be for 2 reasons. One is the population is getting older. That's happened in the U.S. For instance, the United States, there was a big, for the United States, it was a pretty big population growth right after World War II, and so you have this phenomenon called baby boomers, and they are just starting to die now. And so in the meantime, since World War II, as long as those baby boomers stayed alive, even if people weren't having enough children to keep their generation to have the same, keep their population the same. We won't see that until the baby boomers die, and then we'll realize suddenly that our population is shrinking. There's sort of a lag time here, and it's hard to see it unless you're paying attention to the stats. There's another reason too. It's immigration, and the U.S. has also benefited from immigration, which has helped buoy its population. But in the U.S., basically all, and you might think immigrants would have more children. It's not true. Immigrants don't. They settle into the American way of life very, very quickly. And you might think that minorities would have more children. They don't. It is true that the African Americans lagged 30 years behind the white people in reducing their birth rate, but by now both the African Americans and the white people have low birth rates, and they're not meeting replacement rate, not nearly. Okay. So I gave three reasons so far why there's absolutely no population bomb, and why that's not the reason for our resource use. One is that our population hasn't nearly kept up with our energy consumption and our resource consumption. The second one is that our exponential growth is over for the time being, and it looks like we're coming up on perhaps a decreasing population fairly soon now. And the third reason is we never were doing exponential growth. We were following some other pattern, and that pattern, because we weren't following the exponential pattern, which is regular multiplications on a schedule, there wasn't any basis for predicting any disasters or any population bomb. It was a scare tactic as far as I can tell. I want to give two more reasons. The fourth one will flow into the fifth one. The fourth one is if you talk about, say, the cost, so most of the world's population growth is happening right now in Africa south of the Sahara, and some in Asia, portions of Asia, not the rich countries. So let's think about the energy cost, the amount of extra energy we would use, the human race would use, if we added some Africans and some Asians and compare that to some other ways we could use the same amount of energy or save the same amount of energy. So you look at, and this is based on the fact that rich people use a lot more energy and resources than poor people do. So that's I guess I should have used that as another reason why population growth is not the problem. Almost all of the world's resources are being used by the rich countries, so it doesn't really matter much what happens in the other countries. It's not going to change our resource use a lot. Okay, so let's talk about adding 2 billion people in Africa using the same amount of energy per person as they're using now, and 500 million people in Asia, India and Southeast Asia and the stands, but not the rich ones, not the rich countries. So 2.5 billion, let's talk about adding 2.5 billion to our population, and again, those Asians would be using the average for Asia, okay, average amount of energy per person for the 4 countries of Asia, or not, at least the, and then let's compare that to a couple other ways that we could get exactly the same change in energy use. One way is you look at the rich countries, and now I'm going to make an explicit split between rich countries and poor countries. I think you can make a pretty good split here into a rich half, actually a little less than half of the world's population, and a poor half. Okay, and the rich half is Europe, North America, South America, and then 4 Asian countries: China, Japan, South Korea, and Australia. I know that there are other rich countries like Singapore, but just for the for simplicity and to make the numbers easier to add up, I think I'm just sticking with these. Uh, if you quibble with that, it's not going to change these numbers much at all. Um, anyway, the rich half then would be Europe, North and South America, China, Japan, South Korea, and Australia. Europe includes Russia. Um, Now, the poor half, which is a little bit more than half of the world's population, is everything else. Okay, so we're talking about Africa and a lot of Asia, basically. Um, so now, if you look at the rich half and you look at how much their energy use changed, how much it increased between 2014 and 2019, so over 5 years, the rich countries increased their total energy use by 9%. And that 9% that those rich countries increased their energy use by, almost unnoticeable for the people there. In fact, basically unnoticeable. You wouldn't really know that anything much had changed unless you read some statistics somewhere. Um, uh, During those 5 years, the total amount of energy that 9% meant is exactly the same amount of energy that would be used by 2 billion Africans and 500,000 Indians. So, if, okay, and then just to complete this picture, there's a third way that you could uh, save the same amount of energy that those 2.5 billion people would use. It would be if the United States would reduce its energy use to match the European levels. So uh, the average United States citizen uses around 210,000 calories per person per day, and the average person in Europe, not Germany, Germany uses a lot more, still less than the United States, but averaging across Europe, the average European uses about a third of that, 70,000 calories per person per day. So if the 300 some million Americans, United States citizens, were to decrease their energy use from 210,000 to 70,000 calories per person, then those 330 million people would be saving the same amount of energy that 2 billion Africans and 500,000 Asians would use. So my point is not that we should do any of these things, okay, but my point is that if we think that adding 2.5 billion people would be a disaster for the human race or for the planet, why don't we think that a disaster happened between 2014 and 2019 when the rich countries multiplied their energy use by added 9% to it, something we don't even notice. Um, and if we think that adding population must be avoided at any cost, then why don't we think that that extra 9% should be avoided at any cost? And by the way, we're still continuing to add to our energy use every year. If we think the rich countries are, certainly, and if we think that population growth is such a terrible problem, why don't the rich countries think that the resource consumption growth is increase is such a big problem, or another thing is, why do we continue to accept that United States citizens use an average of 3 times the amount of energy that Europeans do? It's an enormous difference. Um, I mean, the reasons are obvious why we do that, and I'm not going to argue with it. I'm just saying, if we think this is okay, why not let 2.5 billion more people arrive on this planet? What would be the problem with that? I don't know. I guess one obvious counter argument might be that, sure, right now those 2.5 billion people in Africa and in the poor countries of Asia are right now using only a certain amount of energy, but sooner or later they're going to get rich like the United States citizens are, and then they'll be using a lot more energy. Well, it hasn't worked like that over the last 200 years. There's been pretty much a glass ceiling, and in general, the rich countries have stayed rich, and the other countries have stayed much poorer. 1/10, 1/20th, or less of the energy use and resource use of the rich countries, and hasn't changed much, whatever people say. There are some countries that broke through the glass ceiling, but they're very few. We can talk about the oil countries in the Middle East, and we can talk about South Korea, for instance, and Singapore, and I'm sure there are some other examples, but in general, even China, which is just on the border of being a rich country, it's really somewhere in the no man's land between rich and poor. It's if you look at the average per person in China, it's a really quite a lot smaller than the United States or the rest of the rich countries. It doesn't really belong in that category for all of its success. So we'll see whether it stays where it is, or whether it'll eventually get through the glass ceiling, or whether it will sink back down below the glass ceiling. But in general, the rich countries are the ones that went through first of all, participated in the empires, uh, the European empires, and then later industrialized. Um, so, and then flowing from that point, if we think that these options are okay, why don't we think that population growth in the poor countries is okay? Um, I want to say, well, there are many things we could do about our resource consumption if we think it's a problem. Um, and reducing our population or controlling our population is only one of 1,000 things we could do. Um, so, as I emphasized before, it's very important for us to focus on the world around us, on the challenges that it poses for us, um, and then think about how we're going to react. First, we have to understand well our situation, and understanding, what we do about our population is a reaction. Okay, it's a way of trying to control our situation. It's not our situation. It's something about us. It's not about the external world. So, first of all, let's get a handle of what our world is like, and then maybe we can figure out something about what we should do. Okay. So that's it. There's no population bomb. There never was. It was a piece of propaganda. It was a lie. It was meant to control the human race. That's what it was for. Um, sure, we were multiplying, but it was clear enough from the beginning that even in the 60s that we weren't multiplying on a schedule. Um, and it was clear even then that our resource consumption was multiplying much faster than we were. Um, so you can go and think about why people would develop this propaganda and so on. I'm not going to speculate about it here. I'm not really sure myself, but it certainly was an excellent way of helping some people gain and maintain power and over many other people. And also is a great way of moral posturing, of saying we're better than you. Um, yeah. Okay, so that's pretty much it for this episode. In the next episode, I'll be talking about our consumption from a different point of view, and the way that we tend to replace. We tend to not just consume and coexist, but we tend to replace, and then we'll go on and talk about, in the next episodes, we'll finally get on to talking about what we use energy for. So thanks for your attention. Please, yeah, just keep coming back.